If my husband's phone had connected to his truck 5 seconds later, I might have spent the next 12 days preparing a welcome home celebration for our son, while Dean and my sister-in-law finished building a life that had no place for me. My name is Ruth Callahan. I was 58 years old, and until that September morning, I believed the greatest danger facing my family was another bad harvest on the Iowa farm my father had left me. I had no idea that my husband was sleeping with Marla Bennett, the widow of my younger brother. I discovered it because the battery in my pickup died. Dean had left his truck beside the equipment shed, so I borrowed it to collect a banner from town for our son Luke's return. He had been serving overseas for almost a year, and the local Veterans Hall was preparing a celebration large enough to make him uncomfortable and proud at the same time. I started the engine, placed my hand on the gear shift, and waited for the radio. Instead, Dean's phone connected automatically through the speakers and began playing an unheard voice message. Marla's voice filled the cab. "I hated waking up without you this morning. Next time, stay until Ruth leaves for the Northfield. She never comes back before lunch, and we need to finish this before Luke gets home." The message ended before I had fully understood the first sentence. I sat behind the wheel while the engine idled, trying to find an innocent explanation that could survive the sound of her voice. There was none. Marla had not spoken like a woman confused about a meeting or a farm account. She had spoken like someone who knew where my husband had slept, when I left the house, and how much time they would have before I returned. Dean had come to bed after midnight the night before. He told me he had been checking an irrigation line near the west pasture and showered before lying down beside me. Marla's tenant house stood beyond that pasture. The lie had been built close enough to the truth that I had never thought to question it. I replayed the message once, not because I doubted what I had heard, but because betrayal has a way of making the mind search for a smaller wound. An affair with a stranger would have been devastating. An affair with Marla reached backward through years of grief, loyalty, and kindness, and poisoned all of them at once. Marla had been married to my younger brother, Paul, until cancer took him 7 years earlier. After his death, she had no stable home, no steady income, and more medical debt than she knew how to manage. I gave her the tenant house on our farm and later put her in charge of the books because she had worked in payroll and needed a reason to begin living again. She had cried against my shoulder at Paul's funeral. She had spent holidays at my table, helped me sort his belongings, and stood beside me in the orchard on the anniversary of his death. For years, I believed helping her was one way of continuing to care for my brother. Now she knew my routine well enough to arrange meetings with my husband around it. Once the shock settled, another part of the message began to trouble me more deeply. They needed to finish something before Luke came home. An affair did not require a deadline tied to my son's return. Whatever Dean and Marla were planning had moved beyond stolen nights and private lies. They were waiting for something to be signed, transferred, announced, or completed, while Luke was still too far away to see what was happening. I did not confront them. At that moment, I had one voice message and a marriage that had suddenly become unfamiliar. Dean controlled our banking, insurance, and vendor accounts. Marla managed the books and had access to every transfer connected to the farm. If I accused them too soon, they could erase whatever they had not yet hidden and leave me with proof of the affair, but no understanding of the plan surrounding it. So I saved the recording to my own phone and drove to town. The woman at the print shop unrolled the banner across the counter. "Welcome home, Luke," was printed in large blue letters, with enough space beneath it for neighbors and friends to add their names. I smiled, paid for it, and carried it back to the truck while wondering whether my son was returning to the same family he had left. 3 months earlier, I still believed we were simply struggling through a difficult season. Spring flooding damaged the south field. 2 grain contracts fell through, and our oldest tractor needed a transmission we could not afford. Dean handled the financial side of the farm. I managed livestock, repairs, planning decisions, and the daily work that kept the land productive. That arrangement had lasted more than 30 years. I never considered it a surrender of control. I considered it marriage, the ordinary division of responsibilities between 2 people who trusted each other. Luke knew the farm was under pressure. From overseas, he began sending money home. The first transfer came from his savings. The next came from part of a re-enlistment bonus. After that, smaller amounts arrived regularly from his deployment pay. He said he wanted to help protect the land his grandfather had left us. I told him to keep the money for his own future. Dean told him the farm might not survive without it. Marla processed every transfer. At the time, I believed Luke's money was reducing our operating loan. I believed Dean was protecting me from financial stress. I believed Marla was repaying the family that had given her somewhere to stand after Paul died. The voice message changed all three beliefs at once. It showed me that Dean and Marla shared more than a bed. They shared my schedule, my son's return date, and a secret they believed had to be completed before he came home. I still did not know that Luke's money was helping finance their future. I did not know that they had begun preparing to sell my father's land, or that they were already telling people I could no longer trust my own memory. That morning, I knew only that my husband was having an affair with the woman I had once treated like a sister. It was enough to break my heart. What I discovered next would show me they intended to take everything else with it. I did not confront Dean after hearing Marla's message. It proved the affair, but it did not explain what she meant when she said they needed to finish something before Luke came home. Dean controlled our banking, Marla controlled the books, and both of them knew which questions I was least likely to ask because I trusted the people answering them. If I showed them the recording too soon, they would deny what they could, erase what they could not, and leave me with pain but no understanding. So I collected Luke's welcome home banner and returned to the farm as though nothing had changed. Dean and Marla were sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a stack of invoices between them. Once I knew the truth, their familiar ease looked different. Marla had filled Dean's cup before he asked, and Dean knew where she had placed every receipt without searching. I asked what Luke's latest transfer had covered. Dean glanced at Marla before answering. Fuel, feed, and part of the equipment loan. Marla lowered her eyes to the paperwork. I'll have to pull the exact figures. The statements were supposedly in front of her, but I did not challenge them. I nodded, poured myself coffee, and let them believe the answer had satisfied me. That was the first day I began keeping notes. Over the next week, I paid closer attention to the routines of my own life. Marla had started answering calls that once came directly to me. She changed a seed delivery without asking and told the supplier I had been tired lately. Dean attended a bank meeting alone, then said the details would only add to my stress. Neither act was dramatic enough to expose them. Together, however, they revealed something more deliberate than secrecy. Dean and Marla were beginning to use the same language about me. Luke confirmed it without realizing what he was doing. During a call from overseas, he asked, "Mom, are you really selling the North acreage?" For a moment, I thought the connection had distorted his words. "Who told you that?" "Dad said you finally agreed the farm was getting too hard to manage. He said you didn't want me worrying while I was over here." I told him no sale had been agreed to. Before I could explain further, Marla entered the room and positioned herself where Luke could see her on the screen. "Your mother's been pushing herself too hard again," she said. "We're making sure she rests." Her concern sounded natural because Luke had heard that voice for most of his life. Marla had remembered his birthdays, sent packages during training, and called him family. He had no reason to hear danger in her reassurance. After the call, I asked why Dean had told Luke I wanted to sell. Marla did not deny that the conversation had happened. She gave me the patient expression of someone correcting a confused relative. "You change your mind when you're exhausted, Ruth. Sometimes you forget what you agreed to." That sentence stayed with me because it did more than dismiss my question. It gave every future disagreement an explanation that made me less credible. Distance had helped them. Luke was thousands of miles away, receiving short calls between duties, while Dean and Marla controlled most of what reached him. I had protected him by minimizing our problems. They had used that silence to speak for me. The next sign was waiting in the mudroom. 3 cardboard boxes marked with my name contained clothes I still wore, photographs from the upstairs hallway, my mother's quilt, and the wooden jewelry box Dean had given me on our 10th anniversary. They were not objects anyone would place in ordinary storage. They were the pieces of a life someone had started packing. I left the top box on the kitchen table. Dean saw it the following morning, and the alarm that crossed his face disappeared almost as quickly as it came. "Marla was helping organize things," he said. "You told us you wanted less clutter." I said the pantry was cluttered. He sighed as though my answer proved his point. "This is what I'm talking about, Ruth. You say something, then remember it differently later." He delivered the accusation as concern. That made it more disturbing. Dean was not only denying what I knew, he was teaching me how he intended to explain me to other people. Once I recognized that pattern, other details stopped looking accidental. A repair invoice listed a delivery address in Missouri, though we own no property there. The company name printed above it was Callahan Ridge Holdings, an entity I had never heard of. Marla called it a filing mistake. Dean claimed it belonged to one of her clients. Their explanations contradicted each other, but both depended on my willingness to stop asking. I photographed the invoice. Then I found an email confirming a bank appointment I had supposedly missed. The subject line referred to transition planning and owner consent. Another message discussed the valuation of the entire farm. Not only the North Acreage Dean had mentioned to Luke. I saved both emails and began recording every occasion when Dean or Marla said I had forgotten a conversation, misunderstood a decision, or needed someone else to handle matters for me. Each item could still be explained on its own. That was how their plan had survived. A box could be organization. A missed meeting could be a scheduling mistake. An unfamiliar invoice could belong to someone else. Even the affair did not yet prove that they intended to remove me from the farm. But every explanation moved in the same direction. I was being prepared to leave, and everyone around me was being prepared to believe it had been my choice. The part I could not yet see became visible the following Tuesday. I returned from the feed store and found 3 surveyors working among my father's apple trees. Red stakes cut through the rows, marking a boundary that had never existed before. The crew leader greeted me as though I already understood why he was there. "We should finish today," he said. The buyers wanted the eastern line completed before the closing inspection. "What closing inspection?" His expression changed. He checked the tablet in his hand, then showed me the work order. It listed our farm parcel, a law office, a buyer, and a closing date 6 days away. 2 days after Luke's welcome home ceremony, Dean arrived while I was reading the information. Marla followed carrying a folder. He called the work an appraisal, but the surveyor corrected him carefully. "Sir, we were contracted for a transfer survey." Dean turned toward me. "Ruth, we discussed this." "No, Dean, you discussed it with someone." Marla opened the folder and removed a document bearing my signature. 2 years earlier, before knee surgery, I had given Dean temporary authority to manage farm business while I recovered. It did not allow him to complete a sale without me, but it had been used to begin negotiations, accept a deposit, order the survey, and convince outsiders that my approval was only a final formality. Dean watched me study the document. "You were on strong medication then," he said. "Maybe you don't remember how much we agreed on." That was when the affair changed shape in my mind. Until then, I had believed Dean and Marla were stealing time, loyalty, and intimacy. Standing among those red stakes, I understood that they had also been constructing a version of me that could be ignored whenever I objected. My memory, my work, and my right to decide what happened to my father's land had become obstacles they believed they could explain away. I asked the crew to stop until the authorization was verified. Then I photographed the work order, the closing date, and every page Marla had brought. Dean said I was making a scene over something I no longer understood. I let him believe humiliation was the reason I stayed quiet. By sunset, I had copies of the voice message, the Missouri invoice, the bank emails, the box belongings, and the document bearing my signature. I still did not know where Luke's money had gone, but I understood why Dean and Marla needed the sale advance before he returned. Once Luke came home, they would need him to choose between the mother he remembered and the confused woman they had already taught him to expect. The survey stopped, but Dean's plan did not. By the following morning, the red stakes were still standing in the orchard, and he had already begun explaining them to other people as a misunderstanding caused by my stress. A neighbor called to ask whether I was feeling better. Our feed supplier spoke more slowly than usual when I answered the phone. Even the receptionist at the bank offered to reschedule my appointment for a time when Dean could accompany me. That was when I understood how carefully the story had been planted. Dean and Marla did not need everyone to believe I was incapable. They only needed people to hesitate before believing me. I went to the bank alone. The manager, Mr. Hanley, had known my father and had financed our first tractor after Dean and I married. He looked uncomfortable when I asked for copies of the previous 6 months of transactions, but discomfort was not the same as refusal. The farm account carried my name, and once I insisted, he printed every page. I spent the afternoon at a corner table in the public library because it was the one place in town where Dean would not think to look for me. The statements covered more than I expected. Operating accounts, equipment payments, crop insurance, and a secondary account Dean had described as a temporary reserve. Luke's transfers appeared regularly. The first had arrived in May. The second came 2 weeks later. A larger deposit followed in June from what I recognized as part of his re-enlistment bonus. By August, he had sent enough to cover the tractor repair, the overdue feed account, and most of the operating loan Dean claimed was threatening the farm. But the loan balance had barely changed. Instead, Luke's money had moved through a series of transfers into an account controlled by Callahan Ridge Holdings. From there, a large payment went to an escrow company in Missouri. Smaller payments covered furniture, fencing materials, stable doors, and a home inspection. The invoice I had photographed was not a mistake. It belonged to a property Dean and Marla were buying together. I found the listing through the address. The place was smaller than our farm, but it had everything Marla had once said she wanted: a renovated farmhouse, a horse barn, and enough pasture to feel rural without requiring the work that had shaped most of my life. One photograph showed a bright kitchen with open shelves and blue cabinets. Marla had saved nearly the same image from a magazine and pinned it above her desk in the farm office. The closing date in Missouri was scheduled 3 days after the proposed sale of my land. For the first time since hearing the voice message, I allowed myself to understand the full shape of their affair. Dean was not drifting toward another woman. He was moving toward a finished future, one Luke had unknowingly helped purchase, and one I had been expected to finance with the sale of my father's farm. I called Luke from the library parking lot. The connection was poor, and there were limits to what he could discuss or how long he could stay on the line, but I needed to hear the truth from him. "How much have you sent home since May?" I asked. There was a pause before he answered. "A little over 70,000. The number left me staring across the parking lot at nothing. "Dad said the bank was close to calling the operating loan," Luke continued. "He said you were too proud to ask me." I had never known the amount. Dean had told me Luke was helping with a few bills, nothing more. "Did your father tell you where the money went?" "To the farm. Where else would it go?" I wanted to tell him everything then. I wanted to say that his father had taken the money he earned far from home and used it to buy a house for another woman. But Luke was still overseas, still responsible for people who needed his attention, and I had not yet learned how much of the evidence Dean could dismiss. So I asked him to send me copies of every transfer and every message connected to the money. His voice changed. "Mom, what's happening? I'm trying to understand something before you come home." "That's not an answer." "No," I said, "but it's the only honest one I can give you right now." Luke sent the records that night. Dean's messages were more calculated than I expected. He never directly asked Luke to finance another property. He wrote about protecting Grandpa's land, helping Ruth slow down, and making sure the family still had options. He made every transfer sound like a gift of duty rather than money sent under false pretenses. Marla's messages were softer. She told Luke I had become forgetful after long days, that I sometimes misplaced bills, and that Dean was carrying more than he admitted. She wrote that they were trying to keep me from feeling ashamed. The cruelty was not only in the lies, it was in how well she understood the language that would make Luke cooperate. He loved me, respected his father, and feared being absent when his family needed him. Dean and Marla had turned all three feelings into leverage. Among the attachments Luke forwarded was an email supposedly written by me. It said I no longer wanted him to return to farming and that selling Parcel N4 would give all of us freedom. I had never called that part of the farm Parcel N4. My father called it the North Orchard, and so did I. Dean and Marla used parcel numbers because they dealt with maps, insurance forms, and valuations. Luke had noticed the difference. "That's why I kept asking Dad if you were okay," he told me during our next call. "The email didn't sound like you. Why didn't you ask me directly?" "I tried. Every time I called, you said everything was fine." He was right. I had spent years protecting him from the farm's problems because I wanted his service to belong to him, not to the guilt of leaving us behind. My silence had not caused Dean's betrayal, but it had given him empty space to fill with his own version of me. After Luke sent the records, the rest of the plan became easier to see. In Marla's desk, I found printed photographs of me asleep at the kitchen table, leaning against a fence after working in summer heat, and standing beside a tractor with grease across my shirt. Each image had a date and a brief note beneath it. Fatigue after simple task, confused about delivery schedule, left equipment running. The last note was false. I had shut the tractor down before replacing a belt, and Marla knew it because she had brought me water while I worked. I also found short video clips Dean had sent Luke. One showed me asking the same question twice because the wind had drowned out his answer. Another captured me dropping a plate after my hand cramped. Removed from their context, the moments looked less like ordinary exhaustion and more like evidence. They were not documenting my decline. They were manufacturing it. The next folder contained the lease for a one-bedroom apartment outside Des Moines. My name was listed as the future occupant. Dean had told the property manager I needed a quiet place closer to medical services and that the move should remain private until my family could help me accept it. A handwritten list divided my belongings into 3 categories: apartment, storage, and donate. My mother's quilt was marked apartment. My father's desk was marked donate. I had to sit down before I could continue. The affair had broken something personal, but the list revealed a different kind of violence. Dean and Marla had walked through my home in their minds, deciding which pieces of my life I would be permitted to keep after they removed me from it. Beneath the lease was a draft speech for Luke's welcome home ceremony. Marla had written it in Dean's voice. It thanked Luke for serving his country and praised him for helping the family through a difficult season. Then it announced that I had chosen to step away from farm life before my health declined further. Dean would explain that selling the land was an act of love, not loss, and that Marla had been the steady hand who kept the family together when I no longer could. The final paragraph welcomed her into a larger role beside him. They had planned to introduce their future before admitting their affair. If Luke signed the consent document they had prepared, his signature would not complete the sale by itself, but it would give Dean what he wanted most, the public appearance that our son supported him. Any objection from me afterward could be dismissed as confusion, bitterness, or another sign that I was no longer capable of accepting necessary change. I photographed every page. Then I found the confirmation I had not needed but could no longer avoid. A hotel receipt from Missouri listed Dean and Marla in the same room during a weekend he claimed to be meeting an equipment dealer. Attached to it was a note in Marla's handwriting about curtains, paint colors, and which furniture from our house would suit the new place. She had circled our dining table. That table had belonged to my parents. Luke had done his homework there, Paul had eaten his last Thanksgiving meal there, and Marla had sat beside me at it while I helped arrange her husband's funeral. Now she intended to carry it into the home she was buying with my husband and my son's money. By then, the affair was no longer the secret I needed to prove. It was the center of every other betrayal. Dean wanted Marla, but wanting her was not enough. They wanted the land, the money, the family's approval, and a version of the past in which Marla had saved what I had supposedly become too weak to hold. I placed everything back exactly as I had found it and copied the files to an account Dean did not know existed. Luke was due home in 4 days. Dean still believed the ceremony would be the moment he finished replacing me. What he did not know was that Luke had already begun comparing the father he trusted with the records that father had left behind. Luke came home on a cold Friday afternoon beneath a sky the color of unpolished steel. Dean had arranged for a small group to meet him at the regional airport, but I asked to see my son before the banners, speeches, and handshakes began. When he stepped through the terminal, he looked older than the man who had left. Not dramatically older, but in the quiet ways distance changes people. His shoulders carried more weight, and his eyes moved through the room before settling on me. He hugged me for a long time. For several seconds, neither of us mentioned the farm. On the drive home, Luke asked ordinary questions about the cattle, the orchard, and whether the tractor had finally been repaired. I answered carefully, aware that every subject had been touched by Dean's lies. The farm he remembered still existed, but the trust that held our family together had already been divided on paper. Dean and Marla were waiting at the house. Marla had prepared Luke's favorite meal and decorated the porch with flags. Dean held his son by the shoulders and told him how proud he was. Anyone watching would have seen a grateful father, a devoted aunt, and a mother too quiet to enjoy the reunion. That was the family they wanted the town to see. Luke waited until after dinner to speak with me alone. We went to the machine shed because it was the only place where Dean and Marla would not hear us without making their interest obvious. He had brought printed copies of every transfer, message, and email he had saved. I showed him the Missouri property, the apartment lease, the photographs used to suggest I was declining, and the draft speech for the ceremony. He read in silence. The most painful moment was not when he saw where his money had gone. It was when he reached the email written in my name and compared it with an old letter I had sent during his first year away. "I knew this wasn't you," he said, "but Dad kept telling me you were changing." I told him I had been changing. I was more tired than I used to be, and the farm had become harder to manage alone. What I had not done was agree to sell it, abandon it, or ask anyone to decide my future without me. Luke looked down at the transfers. "I sent that money because I thought I was helping you. You were trying to. I should have called until you answered, and I should have stopped telling you everything was fine." That was the truth neither of us could avoid. Dean had lied, but he had built those lies inside the silence Luke and I created while trying to protect each other. We did not repair everything in one conversation. Luke was angry with Dean, ashamed that he had doubted me, and hurt that I had hidden the farm's difficulties. I was relieved he believed me, But belief did not erase the months in which he had accepted another person's version of my mind. We agreed on only one thing before leaving the shed. He would not sign anything. The welcome home ceremony took place the next evening at the Veterans Hall. Dean had invited half the town, including the buyers, our bank manager, local farmers, and families who had watched Luke grow up. Marla stood beside the stage helping organize food and greeting guests as though she already belonged at the center of the family. I understood then why they had chosen that room. Dean believed public gratitude would make resistance look cruel. If Luke thanked him, praised Marla, and signed the consent document in front of everyone, the appearance of family agreement would matter almost as much as the legal paperwork. Dean began his speech by talking about service, sacrifice, and the responsibility of one generation to prepare for the next. He praised Luke for sending money home and described the farm sale as a difficult but loving decision made for my health. Then he thanked Marla. He said she had held the family together while I struggled with exhaustion and confusion. He described her as the steady hand who helped everyone accept changes I was no longer able to manage. Marla lowered her eyes with practiced humility. Dean invited Luke forward and placed a folder on the table beside the podium. "This will protect what remains of the farm and give your mother the simpler life she needs," he said. Luke opened the folder but did not pick up the pen. Instead, he asked where his $70,000 had gone. Dean's expression tightened before he answered that the money had covered farm obligations. Luke placed the transfer records beside the proposed consent form. They showed that most of his money had moved through Callahan Ridge Holdings and then into the Missouri escrow account. Dean said the company was part of a restructuring plan. That explanation lasted until Luke showed the listing for the Missouri property and the furniture payments attached to it. The room did not erupt. People simply began looking at Dean differently. Mr. Hanley, the bank manager, stepped closer to the table and examined the documents. He confirmed that I had never signed final authorization to sell the farm and that the temporary authority Dean used could not replace my consent. The buyer asked why he had been told the entire family supported the transfer. Dean turned toward me then, no longer speaking as a concerned husband. He accused me of misunderstanding paperwork and creating confusion because I was frightened of change. Luke answered before I could. She understood enough to find where my money went. Marla tried to explain that the Missouri property was only a backup plan, but Luke placed the apartment lease beside the draft speech. My name was already listed as the future tenant, and Marla's own words described her as the person who would take over when I stepped away. Then Luke played the voice message I had heard in Dean's truck. Marla's voice filled the hall, speaking about waking up without Dean, waiting until I left for the North Field, and finishing everything before Luke came home. There was no need for a long accusation after that. The affair, the money, the sale, and the story about my memory were no longer separate facts. Everyone in the room could hear how they fit together. Dean told Luke that family matters should not be handled in public. Luke looked at the unsigned document in front of him. "You brought it here because you thought public was the only place Mom wouldn't fight back." He closed the folder and returned it to his father. "I'm not signing this. She never agreed to sell." That sentence carried more weight than any speech I could have given. Dean had built his plan around the belief that Luke would confirm his version of me. Instead, my son stood beside me and refused to let his return become the final piece of my removal. I told the buyers the transfer would not proceed and that all further communication would go through independent counsel. I did not describe every betrayal or ask the room to judge Dean and Marla. The evidence had already done what anger could not. The ceremony ended quietly. Some guests left without speaking. Others approached Luke or me with hesitant offers of support. Dean remained near the table, surrounded by papers that had been prepared to erase me and now proved how carefully he had tried. Marla left through a side door before the food was served. Luke and I stayed. The banner I had collected the morning I discovered the affair still hung across the wall behind us. "Welcome home, Luke." For the first time since he returned, the words felt true. The days after Luke's welcome home ceremony were quieter than I expected. Dean did not apologize. At first, he tried to separate each part of what had happened, as though the affair had nothing to do with Luke's money, and Luke's money had nothing to do with the farm. He called the Missouri property an investment, the apartment a precaution, and the documents about my memory an attempt to help me accept reality. But reality no longer belonged to him alone. The proposed sale stopped because I had never given valid consent. The buyers withdrew once they understood how the negotiations had been handled. Dean was required to return the deposit, and the Missouri purchase collapsed when the escrow company learned that much of the money had come from accounts he had no right to use for that purpose. Marla was removed from the farm books immediately, She left the tenant house within 2 weeks, taking only what belonged to her. The dining table remained in my kitchen. Dean moved into a rented place outside town while the financial records were reviewed. For more than 30 years, I had believed losing my marriage would mean losing the structure of my life. Instead, I discovered that the structure had already been hollowed out by secrecy. His leaving did not destroy the home. It made the damage easier to see. Luke stayed longer than he originally planned. He helped me organize the accounts, repair the lock on the office, and move every farm password into a system neither of us could change without notifying the other. We met with an independent advisor who explained the records without speaking to me, as though age had erased my intelligence. Still, paperwork was easier than trust. One evening, Luke and I sat at the kitchen table after dinner. The same table Marla had planned to move into her new house. He kept turning his coffee cup between his hands before finally looking at me. "I believed him because he was here," he said. "You were the one I thought was hiding things." "I was hiding things," I answered, "just not the things he told you." For years, I had treated silence as a kind of protection. I did not tell Luke when money was tight because I wanted him focused on his own responsibilities. I did not tell him when the work became too heavy because I did not want his future decided by guilt. Dean had used that silence as proof that Luke needed someone else to explain me. Luke apologized for doubting my memory. I apologized for making honesty feel like another burden he had to earn. Neither apology repaired everything at once, but it gave us a place to begin that did not depend on pretending the hurt had been small. I also had to make a decision about the farm. Part of me wanted to keep every acre exactly as my father had left it, simply to prove that Dean had failed. But holding on out of anger would have been another way of letting him decide my future. So I leased the south fields to a neighboring family, sold equipment I no longer needed, and kept the house, the livestock pasture, and the north orchard. The farm became smaller, but for the first time in years, every decision about it was mine. Luke did not resign from the military or promise to return permanently. I did not ask him to. We agreed that the land would not become a test of his love, and my age would not become an excuse for anyone to speak over me again. A month after the ceremony, we walked into the orchard carrying a hammer and a bucket. The red survey stakes were still there. Luke pulled the first one from the ground. I removed the next. We worked down the row until the artificial boundary Dean had tried to create disappeared from my father's trees. I kept one stake. It still stands in the corner of the farm office, beside the new account records and the photograph of Paul that Marla once kept on her desk. I did not keep it to remember betrayal. I kept it because boundaries do not become real simply because we assume the people we love will respect them. They become real when we name them, protect them, and refuse to apologize for having them. I used to believe kindness required trust without conditions. Marla taught me otherwise. Helping her after my brother died was not a mistake, and loving Dean did not make me foolish. Their choices belonged to them. What belonged to me was what I did after I understood the truth. Luke still calls every Sunday. Now, when he asks how the farm is doing, I tell him, when I am tired, I say, I am tired. When I need help, I ask without surrendering the right to decide what that help should look like. The farm did not survive because I refused to change. It survived because I finally stopped allowing other people to call control an act of love. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you had been telling your story for you? What helped you take your voice back? And where are you listening from? If your family has served in the military, worked the same land for generations, or had to rebuild trust after betrayal, share your story in the comments. Someone reading it may need to know they are not the only one.